Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. And I want to discuss something this morning. This tending to be a man who does a lot of fasting. Bob Tell. If you can't, I'll just go ahead and make that disclaimer this morning. But I'm not going to skip a topic either that we find in participate or not, and we want to dive into that. And I want to bring out a few things that we find throughout this subject of fasting, and just probably share some things with you you've never thought about or didn't even know before. This thing that we do secretly. In fact, let's get into the word first, and we're going to read our text. Matthew chapter 6. Moreover, when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites with a sad countenance, for they disfigure to men to be fasting. And surely I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you fast, so that you do not appear to men to be fasting, but to your Father. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. If you'll notice, this idea of being the secret place is kind of a theme that's been going through this chapter. So we were looking at the good deeds that we were doing. In fact, down verse 4, it says, let your read that for you. That your charitable deed may be in himself reward you openly. And then when he spoke about prayer, again the idea of being secret, your Father who sees the secret will reward you openly. And now again, as we're talking about fasting, we're back to the idea of doing it secret. Now that doesn't mean nobody can find us, nobody sees what we're doing. But it's the idea that when we do our thing of faith, when we do our things of faith, we're not to do these things so that other people are seeing what we're doing. That's a really man or woman of faith. That's a Christian right here. We're not to do things so that people will look at us. We want them to think that we are people of faith, but not so that they look at us and then like it lifts us up and puffs us up, and so that we walk around, acting like, oh, we are a little holier than the next person. Jesus told a story in Luke chapter 18. I got a lot of little stories this morning to kind of cut to the quick, because it's a lot of different little things. In Luke chapter 18, Jesus told a little story that I thought about in studying for this, about the Pharisee and the tax collector. And he said, we're not to be like the Pharisee. And the Pharisees were religious people, though many of them weren't saved at all. They weren't even saved. They weren't even right with God. A lot of things that they did, that is, they weren't righteous on the inside, they just did a lot of right things. And he said, don't be like the Pharisee who likes to stand up in front of everybody and talk about all that he did. It goes on to say, I'm not an extortioner. I thank God that I'm not an adulterer. I thank God, I'm not a sinner like these people right here. And then he goes on, this Pharisee, I fast twice a week, and I give to the poor. And he's standing, and I'm sure Jesus got this idea from actually seeing, standing on the corner, standing in front of the synagogue, and then just kind of in their preaching manner, talking about how good that they were. Tax collector, who was the man that didn't nobody like him that day, don't care too much for him anymore today either. So tax collector, they're standing on the street corner, and Jesus said, he just smote his breast, and then like this. And Jesus said, which one do you think is more justified? That is, justification is basically the way God's looking at it. Which one seems to stand right in the eyes of the Father? And because he humbled himself and just went ahead and acknowledged who he was. Fasting is a good that we, appear to be holier than somebody else. We're not, and sometimes we're going to mention what we do. And nobody's going to know that anybody does anything good if they don't hear about it. So, so you kind of have to, look at things in different lights. But it's totally different when our motive then becomes that we're doing it so that we're getting something out of it. We're not to do it that way. For doing good things is God. We want this to be treasure laid up in heaven. Number one, I just want to point out that fasting should be done when a believer really wants something bad. Typically, it wasn't like just something that was done lightly, just like a routine thing. I understand diet. Okay? Fasting is not just trying to lose weight. I'm like, you think I'm serious? I'm serious here. I am serious. And all the images that were put on there were people losing weight, dieting. And so the world views fasting as just trying to lose weight. They don't all abuse this thing called the Daniel fast, but I even know for sure that some would get in it and they purposely would do it right after. Well, because you need to kind of all the sweets at Christmas, right? Kind of need to work on that right there. No, it's not a bad thing to do. But that's not fasting. If it's not done unto God and it's not done for the right reason, we're talking about, fasting. The first time fasting was mentioned in the Bible is in Judges chapter, in 2 or 3 chapters there, about the children of Israel, and something really terrible. Separate tribes that made up this nation. And in fact, there was some very lewd and perverted men went to this house of this Levite who was amongst the priests. And they abused his wife. I guess they called her a concubine. But so in other words, it may be. But they took her and they abused her all night, and then at the end of the next morning, she was dead. And the Levite get in the way of it. But he turns around and he takes her and trying to put this in a way that's not too graphic this morning. He sends part of his leaders of these 12 tribes as a message to them of what took place. And when they found this evidence, right, they all gathered together to do something about it. So they went to this tribe of Benjamin and to this over the people who've done this terrible crime. We got to put this sin away. We got to do something about this. Can't just. And so they went to God in prayer. The tribe of Benjamin, these leaders come out and say, no, we ain't going to do such a thing. And so they went the nation went to God in prayer. They went to God because this was not a pagan nation. This was like civil war. This was some of their own people. And God said, well, go up. They said, well, who should we send? He said, send the tribe of Judah in to them. So they sent the tribe of Judah in to fight Benjamin. Now, Benjamin's tribe at this time, they were very talented. They were very strong. They had soldiers that were known to be some of the best fighters, some of the best. Judah went up and fought, and Judah lost. Judah lost by 22,000 of their soldiers went down. Even though God said go do it, they lost the battle. God said, we'll go in. So they sent Judah back in to fight them, and then this next time they lost some 18,000. I'm not going to get into all the reason why God told him to do something, and then I wasn't even studying that particular part to find out the answer, because the thought. I just want you to know today that sometimes God leads us and instructs us to do something even when the outcome is going to be. Sometimes God does that. And here's an example this morning. So this next time they went to God, tabernacle, at that time, I know everybody always thinks tabernacle is in this one location. It's also in a different location. At this time it was at Shiloh. And so they go to Shiloh. Judges 20:26. It says, then all the children of Israel, that is all the people, went up and came to the house of God and wept and sat in the evening. And they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And so this time they go and they fast. They pray, they fast. So, God, we've been defeated twice and He sent us in there. Aren't we supposed to do, put this evil behind? What are we to do? So God to fight, but this time they're successful. After fasting, after really seeking God. The thing is, the moral here is a lot of times expects a little bit more out of us, okay? Sometimes it ain't enough to say, well, God, do this. Sometimes God's looking to sacrifice on our. It's a real popular message, okay? Because today it seems like so much of the time the message is going out. Even in our music, it seems to be more about what we get out of this thing than what we're giving to God. And again, I don't want you to take this too much in the wrong with receiving from the Lord. There's nothing wrong with receiving, and the Bible teaches that. But it seems like so much of the music's all centered today, and I love it. We get out of the deal. Our prosperity, our blessings, our miracles, our needs, more so than God. And I just want to bring it to your mind that the prophet, living, said himself that he must decrease, but Jesus must increase. And we got to understand our going to church, our good works, our prayers, our fast, whatever it is that we're doing in the faith is more about Him than about us. God sent them out that next time, that third time, and they killed 25,600 men out of the 26,000 soldiers that came against them. It was a great defeat, a great slaughter. Sacrifice sacrificed, I think, when they were willing to really show God. Because that's kind of what the fasting thing's all about. I mean, it's like we're sacrificing something to show God. I'm just saying sometimes it's a good idea to put some effort into it, okay? I mean, because like I said, it's easy to just say, well, God, I need this, and then get up and think, well, oh, we really done something. Well, how much effort do we put into showing God that we really want something? In 2 Samuel 12, there was another story about, and I'm not going to get all into it, but, you know, David had the king, the man after God's own heart. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but I know that most of us can say that there's been time in our life already when, well, we won't live in a time. It could be in front of you, or it could be where you're at right now. But we won't, I'm saying that because we shouldn't appear to somebody else, because we all have our weak times. David did. When he had went in and committed adultery with another man's wife, then ended up having to make a prophet to David. Because, you know, God, the thing about it is though David was a great person and had been well, he had this time, he was not. Just because David was a king didn't mean God could let him get away with committing such lewd act and sin. You know, it just kind of sends the wrong man. Try to let David slid, but then he punishes all the poor people, right? That just wouldn't be right. God's just. God's always just, always fair. So you're gonna really pay for what you've done, David. You are going to pay. This thing's going to be worse than you could ever imagine. Your own children are going to turn against you. Oh, and by the way, you're going to lose this child. Now, you can think what you want to about the facts, but if you don't think the right way about God, then guess what? You ain't going to make it to heaven. Because it's not about the way we think about everything. It's about what God says in His Word. God's the giver of life, and God's the good. Whatever He does. And God was going to take this child. And I mean, and so David, I mean, that would break his heart. He loved people like I can imagine. And he calls out to God. 12 verse 21. You know, his servants came to him and they asked David, they said, what is this you've done? You fasted and wept for the child died, you rose up and made food. They couldn't understand it. And David was like, you know, David was fasting. We're a little twisted up here about fasting and what it meant. David fasted, hoping God would hear him and spare the life of the child. But he didn't do that. Because God had spoken the word and concussion to his action. You know, I think about in the book of Jonah as well. People there, these Assyrians, these have been terrible, evil people. They were enemies of the Jews. They hated the Jews. They weren't Christian people. They were heathen in the faith. But God, He would reach out to these Assyrians, give them a chance to get right too. And He sends Jonah, and you know the whole story. Jonah gets swallowed by the fish and spit up, and Jonah decides, well, hey, I think I'm going to do what God wanted. Because it'd been better before he got swallowed by the fish if he'd have did what God wanted him to do, right? It would have spared him a whole lot of heartache. He knows how to persuade us to do it, okay? He knows the vulnerable place to reach us. Just saying, truth, folks. Jonah goes and he cries out to the Ninevites, right? Yet 40 days and God's going to destroy this whole huge city. And it would have been like New York. Destroy it all. And you know, the strangest thing is these Hebrews, I mean, they repented. And so, this is believe God, proclaim the fast, and put on sackcloth from the greatest to the least of them. I will forgive you. He knew that they were legitimate about it. Why? They put on sackcloth. They would sit in their ashes. To show that they really meant business. And they just said, I'm not going to eat this meal. Or I'm not going to drink this. Or I'm not going to eat 2 meals. It doesn't go into detail. They fasted. And God heard their prayer. Of course, the downside to that story is, and it doesn't, the Assyrians went, I mean, it's just the way mankind is. Later on, they just went right back to their old ways. And you know what happened? God destroyed their city. God destroyed the people. Good enough just to say, I'll do it, and then we do it today, and then we forget tomorrow, and we go. Faith means being people of faith right on and on. Something very important to them. They went that extra mile, to save a life, to save a city, right? Number 2, fasting sometimes done in honor, sometimes wrong way to fast. In 1 Kings chapter 21, we have the story of a wicked queen and a wicked king. You see, Ahab was spoiled rotten, and Ahab went out, and he knew that, and had a good vineyard on it, a good vineyard there. And Ahab he just wanted that vineyard. Ahab goes over there to this man, his name was Naboth, and he asked, he says, Naboth, he said, if you will sell me this piece of property here, I will. The problem came in was because of Naboth says, nope, I can't do that to the king. And he said, you know the rules. And the rules were for the Jews is they were allotted particular properties. Each of the tribes were allotted. Still today it's the same. There's properties allotted. And even today there are living in their homeland in their particular areas too. So he said, no, this is for my family. He said, and this is to be handed down in my family, and I'm not going to sell this. And the answer was no. Well, Ahab did not like that. You can figure, right? Him, the king. It took a lot of guts for Naboth to do that. Well, he went back, and Ahab was sullen and walking around, like a baby. Well, then when his wife, who was more wicked than Ahab, when his wife seen him, well, what's wrong with you? And he told her, well, I want this piece of property, and Naboth won't give it to her. She said, so in her being a wicked person, she begins to manipulate the circumstances in order to get. It can really manipulate the circumstances to do something that's wrong. Oh, they think they're so smart, don't they? Ooh, that's bad. So let's proclaim a celebration. And let's make Naboth, let's make him the honor of this celebration. And we'll make this a big thing. And then I'm going to pay some people to go around and say that they've done this against me. The Bible said that the people fasted. Let me read that to you. Nope, I ain't got that here. I won't read it to you. They go through this. They go ahead with it. And the Bible said the people fasted for this. And you can find it if you do want to look it up in 1 Kings chapter 21 by that area. She did that very thing. Naboth was killed. Well, they didn't get away with it. In fact, Ahab and said, you know, he said that little place over there where Naboth was killed, where the dogs licked his blood, that's where the dogs are going to do the same thing. You want to think about it. That's the reality of stuff that's actually going on in our world today. And you know, right and wrong is a serious business, folks. Like today, people do anything in the world that they want and seem to get away with it, but they're not getting away with it. They are not. We'll have to, unless we find forgiveness and find grace with God, we will find the repercussions of our actions. But honor people, fasting is more of a sacrifice unto God for a serious reason. Number 3, fasting is a way to show humiliation before God. Humiliation. In Ezra through 23, let me read this little paragraph to you. Then I proclaimed the fact that we might humble ourselves before our God, to seek from Him the right way for us and our little ones and all of our possessions. To request of the king and ask for the soldiers and horsemen to help us against the enemy on the road, because we had spoken to the all of those who do good and seek Him, but His power and His wrath are against all those who forsake Him. So we fasted. He answered our prayer. Again, time short, I'd love to get into this whole story. It wasn't long ago that we went through the whole book of Nehemiah and together, and they're in the books together, and we looked at a lot of stuff. And what was going on, really brief, so I'm going to just put out a couple sentences. Ezra had to go out and do a job from Jerusalem. Just coming back to Jerusalem, and it wasn't even in their control at that time. And people were out to kill the Jews. They still out to kill the Jews. People hate Jews. They always have hated Jews. They hate. And Ezra was trying to rebuild the city. They were repopulating the area, and there was enemy against them. And Ezra he knew that he was in danger if he left that spot. That's what's going on at this point. So I guess the first thought was, well, if I go back to my king who sent me over here, who was not in that area, send some soldiers. I said, but then Ezra said, but the problem with that is I've done told the king. He said, now if I go back and say, well, king, I need your help, the king's going to think, well, what about your God? I thought he would help me. So you see, he couldn't do that. And really what's going on here is that Ezra grace. Anybody ever heard about traveling grace? You know, we need. Now, the wife and myself, we don't go on a long trip. without praying about that, right? Together a lot. We pray separate a whole lot. But before we go on the trip, a road trip, pray about that. We want traveling grace. We want God to look at it. How many of you know there's a bunch of crazy drivers out there? Crazy drivers out there. Almost every time you hit the road, you're in danger, right, of losing your life. Seriously. I'm not overestimating things, right? You cleared that up for a myriad. It's so dangerous out there. Worse now, right, than 10 years ago. Way worse. And I really feel for the young people coming up that's going to be driving, if the world's still here 10 years from now. It's really going to be bad. And Johnson County is, I think, and I have heard it said that there's more growth in Johnson County than anywhere in the whole state. Well, I believe it. Yeah, that's exaggeration, but there's a whole lot there. He fasted and prayed because this was serious business for him. The fourth point is it's a way to fasting is a method to receive power from God. And they had in Matthew 17, there's a story about apostles, and they had a demon living in them, and they asked for the this demon out of this person. And typically they could do it because Jesus gave them the power to do that. I can't do that. I'm just going to tell you, I can't do that. You probably can't do that either. Why? Because Jesus ain't gave us the power to do it. I would pray for somebody if that's what they want to do. But it's not in my hand. Well, they did, and nothing happened. And the people came to you and said, hey, you're apostles. They're like, what? And Jesus said, Matthew 17:21, however, he said, this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting. Prayer is awesome and fantastic. But sometimes you take it a step further. Sometimes right? Fasting's away. Let me move on quickly. For self-affliction. Self-affliction. Now there's something you don't hear talked about in church very much. Look at that one up on the internet and see what you pull up. Right? You won't get nothing good about self-affliction. Okay, well, I don't approve of a lot of self-affliction. We're not talking about people that's cutting themselves, afflicting themselves. But there's a biblical self-affliction, and one of the methods for that is sacrifice. I'm talking about going without something, putting some effort into it, right? More about something. In Acts 27, verse 9, they were about to take the Apostle Paul out on the water in the time. In Acts 27:9, the Bible speaks about fast. Now, when much time had been spent in selling, because the fast was already over, then Paul began to give them advice. The fast that he was talking about, I believe that he was talking about the time of atonement, the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement was a holy day that the Jews at that time of year. It came up in the fall. It was a fall festival for the Jewish people. Still is. Atonement, they often fasted on that day. Okay, and so you put that because it fell in that time of the year. Paul was trying to advise these people. He said, you know, this time of the year, nor'easters come up on the water. I'm just going to tell you, I already noticed that if the ship is going down, we're going down, we're going to lose our life. Best thing to do is harbor over here for the into this very interesting though. You can go to Acts chapter 27, those chapters ran. The people on the Day of Atonement were fast. Now the Day of Atonement looked back into the past to the time when the priest would offer sacrifices for the forgiveness of their sins. And this Day of Atonement was known as one of their, if the people as a whole nation would find forgiveness of sin. In the Old Testament days, it's like this means they're going to go to heaven because they're participating in the Day of Atonement. That's what it meant to those people. We know that only through Christ today that we find forgiveness of sin. But it was only through Christ back then too, by the way. They were putting their faith in in the whole story. If you have questions about that, we can talk sometime, but it can't take time right now. The Day of Atonement not only looked back, foreshadow, looking forward to literally the tribulation period. Right now, on the prophetic calendar, we are 2024, prophetically speaking, we are approaching the fall, biblically speaking. The tribulation period is coming. It's coming very soon. Now, I don't know. I don't know when. But it's coming soon, prophetically speaking. We've been through thousands of years and we're right on the verge of it. There's another festival day that speaks about the day of the trumpets. Then comes the Day of Atonement. What did, you can go to the 3 and other places in the Old Testament and read about these festival days. You know what God told Israel to do all the way through the Old Testament on the Day of Atonement? He told them to afflict their soul. One of the methods, of the ways that the Jews would afflict their souls on the Day of Atonement and even other times of the year was fasting. Okay? Follow me? So when you put it together with Acts, and fasted at this time, this Day of Atonement. Fasting, going without something to eat, something to drink, or the other types of fast. Method of affliction. It's a method where believers afflict themselves for the sake of what they want for God or for honoring God. A sacrifice. It's more about giving to God than to receive, because everything is. If it's not more about Christ, if it's more about in the hearts of us, all of us, He weighs our hearts, our minds, our thoughts. He knows our motives. Fasting is a method of self-affliction. And closing us out now, last. Fasting yields results. That's why Jesus said, but you, he says, anoint your head and wash your face so that you do not appear to men to be fasting, but your Father who sees you in secret. Secret place. Your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. It can yield results. It can yield rewards. No. talk, right? But sometimes we gotta, and show God. I don't know, if this message is for you today or somebody else, but God's word's always for the future. And it might be even more for somebody particular. God knows these things. I had no idea. I just opened it up. And I like going through a book. I like going through things like that because I'm thinking about, I'm just taking the word as I come to it, folks. And I really like to do that. And God uses it in His wisdom for somebody today. And so we're going to close out with a song at this time, and everybody can stand, sing.